So we recently got a Diablo 4 developer livestream going over the mid-season patch for Season 6, but in that livestream they also announced the next livestream, which is going to be the next week, presumably on the 21st, and that upcoming livestream is going over Season 7 and the PTR for Season 7, and based upon some of the information we got in this livestream and how they were talking about the upcoming livestream for Season 7, it sounds like there may be some pretty big changes coming to classes. And I may be just reading into this too much, but I do think there's some information pointing to this being the case, and one of the biggest pieces being that we're getting a PTR for Season 7, because previously the developers did mention that not every new season would have a PTR. They're really only going to be doing PTRs for seasons that have pretty big system changes or big class changes or new crafting systems that we've seen with the past couple of seasons, where they want PTR testing to make sure these big system overhauls or new systems get the feedback before they actually go live. So presumably Season 7 is also going to have either some big system overhaul or some pretty big changes to other pieces of the game, and I think that's probably going to be to class design of all of the original classes, or at least some of them. And I think the biggest reason why a lot of the original classes would need and potentially be getting some overhauls is directly due to the Spiritborn, because the Spiritborn is just built better. And I'm not even talking about the actual balancing of the class. Obviously the Spiritborn is massively overpowered, but I'm talking about the actual class design, how the skills interact with each other, how their unique class mechanic interacts with their skills, the options they have for legendary aspects and uniques, and how much build variation and options they actually have. Because it's kind of staggering looking at how many options a Spiritborn has and how you can actually go about creating their builds and then comparing it to other classes. And I think the best way to show this is to compare the Spiritborn to the Druid. I think these classes are on the opposite spectrums when it comes to build possibilities and just how many options you have when creating a build and their general class design as a whole. I think the Druid is probably the weakest when it comes to how open the class is and how many different builds you can create with that class, and more specifically, how interesting and unique those builds can actually be. For the Spiritborn, you obviously have a ridiculous amount of options, and this starts at their unique class mechanic, which is also pretty similar between these classes. While I think the Spiritborn and Druid aren't actually super similar as class design as a whole, their spirits and what their spirits interact with, I think is actually very similar to the Druid. So for the Spiritborn's unique class mechanic, you choose a primary spirit and a secondary spirit, kind of similar to the Druid's unique class mechanic where you choose powers between 4 different spirits. Now for the Spiritborn, the primary spirit you choose is absolutely insane and is better than the entirety of the spirit selections for the Druid by itself. So in both of these spirit options for the Spiritborn, you choosing between their 4 main spirits: Jaguar, Eagle, Gorilla, and Centipede. Now the primary spirit is so crazy because it not only gives you a new mechanic for the class, a new substantial passive, but this also adds that spirit's tag to every ability for the Spiritborn. So let's say you choose Jaguar as your primary skill. You would get the power that every 15th time you deal direct damage to an enemy with a Jaguar skill, unleash an additional strike, dealing 15% of the damage you have dealt to them in the last 0.5 seconds. This skill is also how you'll see Spiritborn hitting like trillions of damage, because you basically just build up a bunch of damage and then it does one massive hit. But all skills are now also Jaguar skills. So just off this one selection, you have significantly more build opportunities than a Druid gets, and this mechanic of adding this type of tag to a skill is actually what the Druid is built upon too. The Druid is also built upon adding different tags to skills, and more specifically making different skills like a werewolf skill or a werebear skill, a very similar thing to adding spirit tags to Spiritborn skills. So just that first spirit option gives more possibilities and more power than the entirety of every spirit option for the Druid, and they also get a secondary spirit that basically adds another mechanic as well. Like if you choose Jaguar, your ferocity mechanic is massively buffed up. If you choose Centipede, you're getting a bunch of healing for poison enemies near you. If you choose Gorilla, you're getting more resolve, and resolve is buffed up with unstoppable. So the secondary spirit is also pretty crazy as well. Now let's compare that with the Druid spirit options with their spirit boons. So we can take a look at some of the deer spirits. You gain a small amount of thorns, or you can choose to gain 40 max spirit, or or you can choose to take 15% reduced damage from elites, or you can gain 15% movement speed and 15% impairment reduction. Very basic stat increases. All of the eagle increases are just stat increases. Most of the wolf choices are also pretty basic passive skills or stat increases, except for pack leader, which can just reset your companion skills, which is probably the most gameplay impacting spirit boon you can choose. And the snake spirits are a bit more intricate, but when you break them down, they're basically just more minor effect. Like you have a lucky hit chance to heal on crits, or you deal more lightning damage around the enemy on a lucky hit. All of them are very basic, and they also don't add any of the tags like a Spiritborn spirit does, even though the druid is kind of built in that exact same way. And while I'm directly comparing these unique class mechanics between these two classes, I'm more so trying to show how many options this Spiritborn has compared to other classes. Because even though I think Druid is kind of at the lowest point right now of all the other classes in terms of build possibilities and interesting choices you can make, I think all of the other original classes also don't come close to the Spiritborn. I'm just using Druid as an example. And another place I wanted to make an example, because this is almost directly comparable, is comparing two of the unique helmets for these classes. So if you played the Druid at the start of the game and through a lot of the different seasons, you probably remember that everybody was searching for the unique helmet, the Tempest Roar. This was used for a majority of the best builds for the start of the game and a handful of first seasons, and a lot of the best builds actually required this for the builds to exist. So this was a must-have item for a majority of the builds. And the special of the Tempest Roar is first as a lucky hit, so your storm skills have a chance to give you some spirit, but the main thing you normally take this for is your base storm skills are now also werewolf skills. Keep that in mind. Only your storm skills now get to have the werewolf tag, so they're now werewolf skills and will interact with other werewolf effects, buffs, or procs. But then we go over to the Spiritborn, and you have the Harmony of Ebawaka, a unique helmet. And the effect for this helmet is according to your second Spirit Hall choice, your skills are all additionally either Jaguar, Eagle, Gorilla, or Centipede, depending on the option you choose, and then your skills deal up to 30% multiplicatively increased damage per spirit type they have. So this helmet is completely cracked. So let's give an example. Let's say you choose a Centipede skill. So at a baseline, it'll have the Centipede tag. Then let's say as your primary spirit, you choose Jaguar. Now that Centipede skill will also have the Jaguar tag, meaning it will interact and scale off of anything that wants either of those tags. Then let's say you get the Harmony of Ebawaka, and then for your secondary spirit, you choose the Eagle tag. Now that skill will have Centipede, Jaguar, and Eagle as their spirit tag, which will not only give them up to 90% increased multiplicative damage just for them having the tags, so that could be every skill in your build, but they now have all three of those tags that interact with a bunch of gameplay elements, can interact with a bunch of passives, can interact with different uniques, can interact with different legendary aspects, and can just create so many variations of builds and completely different builds because you can just have so many different tags on any ability you want. And it wouldn't even necessarily be the best option to just put as many tags on an item as you want, but you really don't even need to factor that in that much because it's so easy to just get 3 tags on every single one of your skills or the main skills you're actually using. But go back and compare that to the Tempest Roar. The Tempest Roar, you only add the werewolf tag to only storm skills. Imagine if they made Tempest Roar just have every single one of your skills now be a werewolf skill. Just that change to Tempest Roar would actually create multiple new builds. If they did that one change to Tempest Roar, you can now have like a werewolf build that you're now using primarily earth skills. So you can have like a pulverized werewolf build, and since that skill would also be a werewolf skill, it can now use Toxic Claws to apply poison to everything, and then you could scale your damage off of poison super easily, and then you could potentially change up 2 different legendary aspects to scale your skills even more. You could even go into like Grizzly Rage and use the aspect that gives you massive cost reductions, so you could just have infinite pulverizes in your werewolf build just because that one change to one item, which is basically just changing it into a very very similar thing to the Spiritborn helmet. And it wouldn't even necessarily be crazy strong or the best builds in the game. It would just give you a bunch of additional options of builds to use. And again, I think a lot of the other original classes also have a lot of issues like this in very different ways because all the classes are built in different ways. But I think because of the introduction of the Spiritborn, I think at some point in the future, even if it's not with season 7, even though I think there's a good chance of this happening, I think there are going to start to be some pretty big class overhauls to the original classes to allow them to have more build opportunities like the Spiritborn has. And also, I just want to make this comparison between the Druid and the Spiritborn, just because, like we've gone over, the kind of basis of putting together a lot of these builds is a similar thing. Adding these different tags that will then allow those skills to interact a bunch of the other pieces of that class, whether it be other skills, other passives, uniques, or legendary aspects. They're just kind of built in that similar way. The Druid just has significantly less build opportunities and interesting decisions you can make when compared to the Spiritborn. So my theory is that with season 7, we're gonna be getting some class overhauls or kind of system changes to some or all of the original classes with this season. But that's pretty much all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.